For myself, that was the Rubicon. That was the point of no return for me. Once that declaration came out, then I was committed to bashing it, attacking it, condemning it, not tolerating it. Because it is a violation of the Catholic faith, which I am a priest to defend. And it is a violation of everything that I have been taught. Like my brother said it well, Father Tim, the skinny one. He said it very well in May of this year when we had our priest meeting. He says, you know, when I get up in the morning, he read the new declaration before that declaration. It was a March 18th document of Bishop Fillet, official letter to the priests of the Society of St. Pius X in our internal bulletin called the Cor Unum. So it's an official statement. And in that official statement, Bishop Fillet says, if we get these 2 conditions, which are even worse than the 6 conditions that came out, if we get these 2 conditions, then we accept a deal with Rome. And then secondly, we must change our attitude towards Rome because Rome has changed, and we have to realize we've got to have a new attitude, a new direction. And so Father Tim says, you know, when I get up in the morning and I shave and I brush my teeth, I do it in order to go out and fight modernists. I do it to go out and wage battle. I know why I'm getting up in the morning. Now you got this, Vatican II isn't all that bad. The council, but we got to have a better attitude towards Romans. So now when I go, I brush my teeth and I go out and say, now what am I supposed to do? I used to know clearly why I got up in the morning, why I walk out that door, and why I go out to be a priest in this modern world. To fight the modern errors clearly and boldly, to have an attitude of war. Now we have an attitude of peace. So this is very serious. And we have to, this change is essential. This change is one of principles, and it has to be dealt with. It has to be condemned. That's the first thing. And then other practical conclusions follow from that. But it must be condemned. In any case, the Father is going to go through we need to have a basic understanding of this July the 14th declaration, its conditions and so on. So Father Hewko is going to go through a little bit the conditions and just some of the problems with it that we should know. And the change of doctrine between the old SSPX and the new SSPX, some of the points that we should know. Father Hewko is on.
So the 2 documents that came out in July is the General Chapter Statement. And at the time, I was actually in Spain with Father Stanich. We were on the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. And I had talked to and written Bishop Fillet. I had asked him why these confusing and ambiguous interviews on CNS. I don't know if you saw them, but the very first sentence begins, it's not about the SSPX versus Rome anymore. It's not that anymore. And already it's no more the declaration of war. And we all understand, we have always understood the heart of the whole fight between SSPX and modernist Rome is doctrine. It's the faith. Because at the root level, none of us can save our soul without the true Catholic faith. That's why this fight is so important. That's why these issues are so important for all of us. Because none of us want to go to hell. And we cannot save our soul without the true faith. St. Paul says it's impossible to please God without faith, the true faith. So that's the heart of the issue here, because the faith is under fire. And if there's no longer a battle with modernist Rome, like Father Pfeiffer was just saying, then who are we fighting? And if you don't know your enemy in the battle, it's confusing. So the I'll bring this up as well. I mean, if you read the great encyclical letter of Leo XIII on Freemasonry, you will see how he attacks their method of destroying Catholic society. And one of their methods is ambiguous language, ambiguous documents. And by that, the people just get lulled to sleep. And you don't anymore know the enemy. And the priests and the bishops fall asleep. So, the general chapter statement, you can find it on your own. I have the whole text right here. I'm not going to read the whole text to you, but we'll bring out main points. Father Pfeiffer, you're...
I can actually print it out and hand it out to people, actually. Just take a few minutes.
So here is the general chapter statement. On July 14th. Anybody know significant?
Bastille.
The storming of the Bastille. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting connection. So why is this so important? Firstly, if you read the document, it sounds good at first. And as Father Standish gave me this document right after he came off the press, the internet, we were in Spain, we were in a hotel, kicking our feet up with all their blisters and sore feet from walking all day. And I read this, and the first time through, you know, it sounds familiar, the language sounds familiar, there's text, there's Vatican II, there's error, magisterium, tradition, all the words you want to look for. But then I read it again, and I said, wait a minute. I said, Father, wait a minute, you realize what this says? And the key deadly sentence is this. Firstly, it begins. I'll read the part of the paragraph. We wish to express our gratitude to each and every member of our society, priests, brothers, sisters, third order members, to the religious communities close to us, and also to our dear faithful for their constant dedication and for their fervent prayers, etc. Every sacrifice and pain accepted with generosity has contributed to overcome the difficulties which the society has encountered in recent times. We have recovered our profound unity in its essential mission. And that struck some of us priests as strange. We never lost our unity. Our unity was always the combat for the Catholic faith, for the social reign of Jesus Christ the King. The Archbishop, that's what he was all about. And combating the errors of Vatican II and modernism, which are destroying the faith, the church, and bringing many souls to hell. So that was strange, that we recovered our profound unity. So what is this? And then it goes on. To preserve and defend the Catholic faith, to form good priests, and to strive towards the restoration of Christendom. That's a good sentence right there. But now the deadly one. We have determined and approved the necessary conditions for an eventual canonical normalization. All right, it's not so, you got to read it several times to get it, sink it in. But we have determined and approved. This might sound like a strong analogy, but I think it's very applicable. And a young lady who is determined and approves to have an abortion, is the sin committed at the time of the abortion, or is it committed when she's already consented and determined and approved to do it? You tell me. Is it with the intention or the action? So the intention. So I think you can compare what the approval and determination to have the abortion is what the approval and determination is to the actual agreement with Rome, the practical agreement with Rome. I know it's a strong analogy, but we're dealing with eternal souls here, which is far more serious a sin than abortion. So if a woman approves and determines, I'm going to have an abortion, it's going to be I got the date set for 3 months down the road, the sin's committed. The compromise is already done. And the execution of the actual abortion, when it actually happens, that's just the result of what was already approved and determined to undertake. So same with this declaration. If you approve and determine to make a practical agreement with Rome, and we're talking not the glorious Rome of St. Pius X and Pius XII that were clear in doctrine and held the faith. We're talking about modernist Rome that Archbishop Lefebvre said is surrounded in darkness. Liberal modernist Rome with the Protestant tendencies. The Rome, as Archbishop Lefebvre knew, there were Masonic, satanic masses going on. And with the complete liberal popes, the popes who have two faces, one that's Catholic, one that's liberal, in one head. So if we approve and determine to make a practical agreement with that, the poison's already in. And when the actual agreement comes, that's only a result from it. Yeah, here's some conditions.
Okay, no, I can have it. We'll just do this first.
Okay. So Father's going to make a copy of the general chapter statement. But mainly that one sentence is already a huge shift of doctrine for the Society of St. Pius X. Does anybody know why? Someone brought it up last night in the talk. Does anybody know why this is such a big deal to put a practical agreement before a doctrinal agreement?
Of necessity, you have to buy the doctrinal outlook of the Vatican too.
Exactly. Exactly. Once you make a practical agreement without a doctrinal agreement, you're making an agreement with men who have a history of not professing the Catholic faith, in fact, doing everything to destroy the Catholic faith. And Assisi last October. It just happened a year ago. And the Pope, as you know, he called together all the world religions, Buddhists, Voodooists, Anglicans, Muslims, and it was all smiles. And the excuse was, we're not getting together to pray. We're
not praying together, but getting together to pray.
That's it. So this false ecumenism, and as you know, has been condemned by Pius X, Pius XI, Leo XIII. All the popes have consistently condemned this. So this is the major shift. Before, the Society of St. Pius X always stood on this ground. First, the doctrinal agreement. Always. Because doctrine is first. Bishop Williamson just gave us a great retreat last week. And Christ is saying always, I teach what I was been told by my Father. My doctrine is not mine, but my Father's. So Christ gives us the doctrine from the Blessed Trinity. He gives it to the apostles, and the apostles' duty is, and the priests, bishops down the century, to pass down that doctrine. That's tradition. The doctrine is always first. St. Paul says to Timothy, watch over the doctrine. And the popes and all their encyclicals, the good popes, the traditional popes, it's always bishops, watch over the doctrine, watch over the catechism, make sure the priests are teaching the true faith. When Pius X condemns modernism in his encyclical Pascendi, at the early part of the century, he says the same thing. Watch over the doctrine, the doctrine, the doctrine, the doctrine, because how you think is how you act. And we Catholics think a certain way, so we act a certain way. Well, our doctrine is the Ten Commandments, the tradition of the church, the catechism, scripture and tradition. That's always first. What happened always since Archbishop Lefebvre, and he says it many, many times, there cannot be a practical, canonical agreement without first the doctrinal agreement. It's impossible. Now, a lot of objections say, well, the Archbishop didn't always say that. He was open to a practical agreement several times. And another one they always bring up is Archbishop Lefebvre signed the protocol of May 1988. But he himself, before he signed it, he studied it, and although he had a handful of society priests who were telling him, you should sign, we should make an agreement, this is the time. And the Archbishop was very hesitant. And just to show you, it's not, he was kind of pressured into it. Father Bizig, he told one of the priests that he was there, and he said, we really did pressure the Archbishop. And Dom Gerard, he also said, the Archbishop, you should sign this agreement. You should sign this agreement. So the Archbishop, he was up all night. He couldn't sleep well. It was bothering him. And the day came, and he did sign the document. And after that, his conscience got worse. He couldn't deal with this. And he saw this was wrong. And the next day, he tore it up. He took his name off. And he said that was a grace of God. And he said, I had already gone too far, and already that was a big mistake. Remember that. He said it was a big mistake to sign an agreement with Rome without the doctrinal clarity. And he knew. Now, so with the general chapter statement, this was the big shift. We have gone from doctrine first to practical, to the practical agreement, and doctrine not first. Why is this so important? Why is this so serious? Because Archbishop Lefebvre, in his sermon on the consecration of the bishops in 1988, he said it 3 times in that sermon very clearly. He said, we have to wait for tradition to come back to Rome. We cannot make an agreement until Rome comes back to the Catholic faith of all time. He insists on this over and over and over again, and you can find quotes. We have pamphlets that are out continually quoting this. And if you want to read something very good, maybe we could get copies made for you. These are the 3 talks of the Archbishop. In 1988, the Episcopal consecration is the decision to actually go ahead with it. And then here is the letter to the 4 bishops. And what's interesting, he says to the 4 bishops, stay united in the faith. And that's why it was a great grace for Bishop Follet to receive that letter from Bishop Williamson, Bishop Galaretta, Bishop Tessina Mallory, who were pleading with him, begging with him, don't go in this direction of a practical agreement above a doctrinal agreement. We have never accepted this position. The Archbishop always opposed this position. And recently you hear a lot more doses of the poison coming from the SSPX pulpits, coming from the websites. And I have known good priests who I thought would be very strong and very opposed to this new revolution, this new change of doctrine. And now many good priests are saying, well, Vatican II, the Archbishop did sign most of the documents. After all, it's not all bad. 95% can be acceptable. But the Archbishop, he wrestled with this modernists, the Foxes, and one of them being Cardinal Ratzinger. He dealt with them face to face. And Archbishop Lefebvre learned, it's like a wrestler, and from 9th grade to 12th grade, or from sophomore to senior in college. He gets better with time. He learns the moves of the enemy. And so the Archbishop, in that way, he kind of graduated to the school of wrestling with modernists face to face. So that by before 1988, you see him kind of sometimes hoping for some agreement with Rome. In 1979, Pope John Paul II is elected Pope. Everybody thought, well, he's devoted to Mary, he's from Poland, he was under the communists. This will be a good Pope. Maybe he'll consecrate Russia. Maybe he'll turn things around. And the Archbishop kind of had that optimism as well. And you have a few expressions of his in 1979, kind of being hopeful for some agreement to be met, and the experiment of tradition to thrive. But what happened? Pope John Paul II took the throne, and 1986, Assisi won, which was a horrible scandal. Was Archbishop Lefebvre silent about that?
No.
Was he muzzling his priests, saying, well, don't be too loud about this? No way. I remember, 86, all of you who were around at the time should remember, there was guns and blazes from the society. And the Archbishop sent to the Pope those drawings. And he basically said, since you won't listen to me, maybe the drawings will speak to you. And it showed the Pope John Paul II at the gates of heaven, and our Lord and Jesus and Mary saying, there's no place here for ecumenists. And the devil's on the side saying, ecumenis this way, buddy. If you remember that. It was not disrespectful, the drawings. It was not mockery, it wasn't sarcastic, it was truthful. And that's the Archbishop. But what's interesting in his letter to the bishops is stay united in the faith. I mean, I can't understand, I can't explain why this is happening. It's very sad to us, society priests. But Bishop Follet didn't listen to his three bishops. I wish he did. I wish they stayed united in the fight. But now we have one expelled, one's in the doghouse in Chicago, where he was in Acon. Bishop Tissy had a tremendous influence over the seminarians in Acon, and that influence is now taken away. And Bishop Galaretta, with all respect, these are our bishops, but it's very sad. He recently said in a conference, the written text, it was omitted, but in the audio, you can hear Bishop Galaretta said, if the unthinkable should happen, and the General Chapter votes for a practical agreement to take place, he said, tant pis, in French, too bad, we will have to go with it. And that's Bishop Galaretta, you know, it's hard to, so what we're watching already, I'm seeing it with some brother priests. They're going from a strong anti-modernist, anti-council stand to starting to accept and eat this poison. That council's not so bad, Vatican II, well, it's partly acceptable. Religious liberty, you know, it has to be discussed and dialogued, and it's not so grave. But read Archbishop Lefebvre. Read him again and again. You'll see it. And all he does is echo the popes of tradition. And he's pulling out every shotgun, every rifle against the enemies of the faith. Not the people, but the errors. So this is the big revolution of that statement right here. It's very, very important, this point. And for me, that was enough to say, wow, we have a new SSPX. If you're familiar with the 2006 general chapter statement. It was quite good. And it said, we're gonna maintain the stand of our founder, Archbishop of Fed. We will never make a practical agreement unless there's firstly a doctrinal agreement with Rome. Unless Rome comes back to tradition. So what happens is we have now accepted a principle which is, it has huge consequences. I won't go into all that. Ideas have consequences. And this is putting practice above doctrine. To put it very bluntly, it's the Masonic, the Freemasonic principle of unity over the truth. And that was the big words from the superiors after the general chapter. And even before. Unity, unity, unity. And we have this term in the general chapter statement. We have discovered our unity. And for the priests, at least the ones I talked with, they were, what's going on here? We've always been united in the fight for the faith, against the errors, against Vatican II, against modernism, for the kingship of Christ, for the salvation of souls, for the restoration of the true Catholic Mass of all time. You've always understood this, right? This position of the society. But now it's this, the unity over the truth. Unity over doctrine. In other words, let's get together and go along to get along with Rome. So, I'd like to just briefly now touch on the 6 conditions, because in the general chapter statement it says we will have the practical agreement, we seek it, we approve it, we determine it, with the necessary conditions, the essential conditions. So what are these conditions? All right, this is getting to the nuts and bolts of the documents, but this is important because this is where the revolution took place. Let me just give a little example again. I knew a bishop. I grew up serving our bishop Brzana. He was from Poland, and when I was in the seminary and a priest, I went to talk to him. And he said, "Yeah, I was at the council at Vatican II." He was one of the bishops, and he said, for all the bishops, they had, you know, the Italian cafes, the bars. They call them bars, coffee shops in Europe. And he said they had one coffee shop called Bar Jonah and another one called Bar Tholomew. So I talked to Bishop Brzana, pray for him, he's dead now, but he wore his beretta, he wore his cassock, he was a conservative novice sort of bishop. But he told me, you know, I was there at the council, it didn't happen that way. And he, like many of the council bishops, they really didn't read the documents. It was like probably many of the priests at the general chapter in July in Menzingen. They read it, all the right words were there, you know, it was in French. You know, it sounds good, sounds like the normal trend. They signed it. But this is how the enemies destroyed the Catholic Church from within. It's through the documents. The ambiguous language that can be interpreted in 2 ways. And that is the cunning of the enemy. That is a tactic of Freemasonry, as Leo XIII points out. And that is a tactic that was used for the society. And you can bet the modernists have long been waiting to get in a crack somewhere to destroy the last bastion of Catholic tradition, the SSPX. It is the last bastion. Of course the Masons want to destroy it, divide it, confuse it. And the way they did it was the way they did it at Vatican II, through the documents. Shift the principles. In 1966, people still had the Tridentine Mass. The revolution just took place. A huge revolution. The worst disaster in the history of the church just took place, Vatican II. 1966, 67, you know, the nuns were still teaching, the priests were still hearing confessions, Mass was Trinity and Latin Mass. You, the people, did not see the revolution until 69. On that first Sunday of Advent, when Father O'Harity turned the altar around and said, "Now call me Father Larry, and good morning, folks, we got a new Mass." And then the people woke up. Many tradition, your grandparents and many of you gray-haired ones, you saw this is wrong. And how many people we meet in the airports, old veterans of war, men, who said, when I saw that new Mass, I walked out of the church and I've never been back since. Because they all sense this. So the revolution is already taking place with this in the Society of St. Pius X. You're not going to see the effects of it till later. The approval to have the abortion has already been done. But the actual abortion, that is the massacring of the liturgy, of the doctrine, and the new catechisms, and that's going to come down the road, who knows how long. It didn't take Labarue that long. When Labarue made an agreement with Rome in 1988, guess what their conditions were? Their conditions were, you can preach against modernism. Cardinal Ratzinger said, okay. And you can keep your Tridentine Mass, no problem. Sounds very close to our conditions. And Campos, their conditions were they could preach, criticize Vatican II, preach against modernism, and keep the ancient liturgy of 1962. But what happened? Every one of these groups, one by one, made agreements with Rome on this level. And what has happened to them? All of them have compromised. In fact, in Campos, the priests who were strong against Vatican II and the new Mass, they're now saying the new Mass, giving communion in their hand with altar girls. Campos. In Labarue, in 5 years, Archbishop Lefebvre was seen to cry, to weep, when he knew that they made the practical agreement. Dom Gerard of St. Magdalene Monastery in Labarue, France. And when they signed that agreement, he wept, because he saw what would happen. He said in 5 years they'll have the new Mass. And he was prophetic. They did. And worse, one of the priests of Labarue wrote a defense on the document on religious liberty. In other words, he lost the faith. And that's why this is this is a battle for us, because we are in danger of losing the faith. Once you dance with that poisonous snake, that poisonous tarantula or scorpion, Vatican II, you can't dance with it. And the Archbishop, how many times he said, you cannot make an agreement with Rome, modernist Rome. You cannot shake hands with the enemy of Jesus Christ. He said, I told Cardinal Ratzinger, you are working to destroy the kingship of Christ in society. And we want to crown him as king. We want the whole restoration of tradition. You're working in diametrically opposed. We're in AM/FM. And there cannot be an agreement. Even if you grant us our seminaries, our Mass, the right to preach against Vatican II, he said, no, there cannot be an agreement until Rome recovers the faith. Why? You come to another big principle, and this touches on the conditions. There's a great saying one of the old society priests used to say, the pastor sets the tone. The pastor sets the tone. Dad is head of the house, he sets the tone. And that's just the principle of nature. The superior forms the subjects. Now, if we, the Society of St. Pius X, go under modernist Rome, no matter how many conditions and privileges and guarantees of not being toyed with, you still deal with that basic principle, which is what? You got to answer to the superior. And the superior is going to form you. And modernist Rome is against Catholic tradition. It's proven over and over again. So, look at St. Peter's. When they came under Rome, they elected Father Bissing. They elected him again to be Superior General. Rome stepped in and said, nope, we don't want him, we want this wet noodle. It was soft on the new Mass, soft on Vatican II. So, that's an example. If we come under Rome, Rome can step in and say, no, you're not going to make this decision. No, you're not going to elect him as Superior General, we want this one. No, you're not going to have them to be consecrated bishops, we want our guys in there. Do you see? Do you see? And the Archbishop Lefebvre, he saw through this. You surrender the right of choosing your own bishop, Superior General, and big decisions, you're done. It's only a matter of time. So the conditions are, I'll read through them briefly. The first three are sine qua non, that means in Latin, without which there won't be. It means they have to be. These are mandatory. Notice part one, the sine qua non conditions to which, look at this sentence, to which the society binds itself. These are serious words, binds itself to these conditions, and that she requires from the Roman authorities before considering a canonical recognition. Okay, all right, let's see what they are. Number one, the freedom to keep, to transmit, and to teach the sound doctrine of the unchanging magisterium of the Church. Sounds good. And of the immutable truth of divine tradition. Sounds good. Truth doesn't change. You have to write, the right words are there, divine tradition. Freedom to defend. Now, we're asking freedom for what? Freedom to do what little St. Lucy and St. Agnes and St. Anastasia and St. Pancratius, a 14-year-old boy, did they have to have permission to have the freedom to profess the Catholic faith and defend it and die for it? Freedom to defend, correct, and reprove, even publicly, those responsible for the errors or novelties of modernism, liberalism, of the Second Vatican Council and their consequences. So it's very carefully worded, because it's saying, firstly, asking permission, freedom from who? To teach and reprove and correct and attack the errors. Who are we asking? From the very ones who are destroying and attacking and crushing Catholic tradition. And the other point is, it says here, asking the freedom to correct and reprove, even publicly, not the errors of Vatican II, which should be in bold print, the errors of Vatican II, the documents of Vatican II, but only those responsible. In other translations, it goes, the promoters of modernism, liberalism, and Vatican II. So there's a big difference between attacking the one who teaches error from from attacking the books that he wrote. The Archbishop said this, the Catholic Church used to, read the books of Teilhard de Chardin and condemn his books and say, you can't read this, it's against the faith. And that's what Archbishop Lefebvre has always been doing. The Society of St. Pius always has been doing with the Vatican II errors. We've attacked it doctrinally, the errors themselves in the documents. But now you have a new terminology here, attacking the persons. And of course, you don't attack your own superiors if you're under them usually. At some point, if you don't get out from under them, you're going to fall in line. And they're going to make you fall in line. So that's the first one. Second one is exclusive use of the 1962 liturgy. That's great. St. Peter's had this, Labarue had this, Campos had this, and they've all succumbed. The retention of the sacramental practice that we have at the moment, including holy orders, confirmation, and marriage. Good. 3, the guarantee of at least one bishop.
No, excuse me, the problem with number 2, there's
Yes.
a very serious problem with number 2. When you say we ask for the exclusive right to celebrate the 1962 liturgy, that means clearly though implicitly, you accept the other option as good. If I ask you for the exclusive right to celebrate the traditional Mass, it means that principal arguments we have against being under the local bishop. As an example, if I ask Father Couture, or if I ask Father Rostand, can I open a chapel in Boston, Kentucky? When I ask that question, what he's considering is, are there enough people to go to Mass there? Do we have enough money to, run a parish? Can we practically do it? So he says yes, or he says no. But the question is about nuts and bolts. So sometimes he'll say yes, sometimes he'll say no. But if I ask Bishop Kurtz, can I celebrate the Latin Mass in Boston, Kentucky? It's a totally different question. The question is, I know that you already have many good and legitimate Masses all over this diocese, called new Masses. But I'm asking for a special permission to be allowed to celebrate the Mass. When I ask my local sphere, can I say Mass in Boston, Kentucky, I'm not asking for permission to say the Mass. I'm asking for permission to be in this particular place. But when I ask the local bishop, can I have permission to say the Mass, I'm asking permission for the right to say the Mass, which I have no right to ask permission for. It's like if you get married in front of a priest. You come back 15 years, Father, yes, can I still be married? You cannot call back 15 years later and ask permission to be married. You can't ask, if you ask permission to be married, not just to be divorced, if you ask permission to be married, you commit a sin. You don't have permission to be married, you're stuck. Live miserable and live with it. So the fact is, you cannot ask for that permission. And as a priest, I cannot, as a Catholic priest, ask for permission to celebrate the Catholic Mass. I cannot ask for permission as a Catholic to profess the Catholic faith. I cannot ask for permission to preach that faith as a priest. I have an obligation to do those things. The permission is canonical or jurisdictional. You preach here for the purpose of order. You preach there. You say Mass in this chapel. You say Mass in that chapel, and so on. And the jurisdiction also is for the purpose of protecting the faith. So that if I were to stand up and preach that Jesus Christ is not God, or He didn't really rise from the dead, then the bishop says, I take away your jurisdiction. You can no longer preach. The purpose of the jurisdiction is the protection of the Catholic faith. One of the subtle problems of the new Code of Canon Law is the very last code is Suprema Lex Salus Animarum. That's not in the old code. The supreme law is the salvation of souls. Because in the old code, that is a principle of every canon. It sounds like a good thing to make it an extra canon, but when you make it an extra canon, it goes alongside the other canons. In the old code, it was never allowed. That was not a principle. That was not a canon. You would never say Suprema Lex Salus Animarum was not a canon of the old code. It was a principle of the old code. And it's in every single canon of the old code. So our supreme law is the salvation of souls. Our supreme law is the preservation of the faith. And so that first condition, asking for the freedom to profess the faith, is against being a Catholic. The second condition is an implicit acceptance of the new Mass. We cannot ask for that right. Just like someone saying, can I still be married? You don't go to the government and say, can I still be married? If the government says you're not married, and the government gives you a bill of divorce, all that happens is that the government official gets to go to hell. And the government document is worthless. You're still married. What God has joined together, no man can put asunder. And that is also the case with regard to our faith. Only the problem with marriage is that it ends when you die anyway. It's temporary, fortunately. But with regard to the faith, it's permanent and eternal. And so therefore it's obviously more grave than someone asking if they can still be married. This second condition, in fact, is wicked. But it's subtly wicked, you know.
I want to cover the three desirable conditions.
No, that's fine. We should also, by the way, this document is something we should probably copy this and make it available to people. This is something that people have a hard time getting their hands on. Who has read these things, by the way? And by the way, who has seen this May 11th CNS interview? Has everybody seen it? Right? Okay. Okay, fine. So anyway,
Yeah, we didn't cover yet the desirable conditions.
just go through it.
Yeah, very briefly, the three desirable conditions are, they're called desirable, so they don't have the force of obligation. And remember, these have not been changed. With all the talk of, well, there's no agreement right now, it's not going to happen under this Pope. Have you heard that? Things are back to normal. Things are not back to normal. As one priest well put it, these are all the for sale signs in front of the front lawn of the SSPX. And with all the talk of, well, there's not going to be an agreement now, the signs are still out there. These conditions are still in stone. They have not been changed. This has not been changed. And we cannot believe that there's not going to be an agreement until these things are removed and put back to as they were. So here's the three desirable conditions. First, our own ecclesiastical tribunals in the first instance. This regards, for example, marriage cases and annulment cases. There's a first instance, second instance, third instance. We're only asking by this condition the right to handle the first instance. So Rome can overturn it in the second or third instance. So it's kind of doesn't make much sense. Two, this is the most deadly one right here. And Father just touched on it right here. The exemption of houses, it's desirable. What is? The exemption of the houses of the Society of Pius X in respect of diocesan bishops. What's that mean? It's fancy terminology, but it's basically saying if we come under the local bishops, well, that's the law of the church, big deal. And Bishop Fillet, when he was asked this very question in an interview, he said, yeah, I see difficulties, but he concluded, well, since when is life without difficulties? But it's very serious, this second condition, because obviously it's the law of the church that you come under the diocesan bishop. And if we come under the diocesan bishop, what's going to happen to our catechism program? What's going to happen to opening new houses? What's going to happen to that pressure? And the pressure is already on the priests. All the priests of the society know now, you better not say anything against a false agreement with Rome. You're going to be silenced. You're going to be transferred. You're going to be kicked out. You're going to be punished. So everybody's got the lesson is learned. So the pressure now is already there, and we haven't even made an agreement yet, practically. So to come under the local bishops, as we've been saying, is like surrendering the sheep to the wolves. It's very serious. And you know these local bishops. You know what they're up to. In every diocese, they have the new Mass. Every parish differs. They have the goofball Mass. They have the clown Masses. They have folk Masses, rock and roll Masses. In the Diocese of St. Louis, they have the rock and roll Mass. And so forth and so forth. And then the third desirable condition is a pontifical commission in Rome for tradition. That's something Archbishop Lefebvre did ask for. Dependent on the Pope with a majority of members and the presidency for tradition. So again, Archbishop Lefebvre he himself did put that in a previous agreement that he proposed to Rome in 1987. But he saw later, he saw very clearly that we cannot even surrender the right of the major decisions of the bishop, of the superior general, surrender that to the powers of modernist Rome, because it would do us in. And notice the mind of the Archbishop, it's not just about our SSPX, it's not just about our congregation, our society. He founded it, he knew it was the will of God, it was blessed by God, he saw its growth. But But his mind was further than that. He understood the whole, if I can compare it in a house. The house has all different kinds of congregations, orders, Benedictines, Carmelites. SSPX is a pious union of priests. Imagine the whole house being threatened on fire, and one of the rooms saying, well, we want our right to exist. We want our legalization. We want our room to stay. But the house is on fire. And the Archbishop understood the whole house of the Catholic Church is on fire. The faith is in danger. And that's why he said very clearly, we can't just look for our own canonical recognition. We have to fight for the whole of the church militant. And that means we cannot make an agreement with Rome and get what we want for our good unless Rome comes back to tradition. Unless the whole house is safe again to live in. Unless the faith is held up and protected and the errors condemned again by Rome. And that's why in 1989, the Archbishop said, and repeat this to many priests, repeat this if you write Bishop Follet a respectful and letter of pleading, and Bishop Tissier, remind them of this great quote of Archbishop Lefebvre. He said, from now on, dealing with Rome, I will not put it on a practical level. I will raise it to a doctrinal level. And I will ask the Pope, do you believe in Pascendi? Do you believe in Humanum Genus? Do you believe in the syllabus of errors of Pius IX and Quanta Cura? And all these great traditional encyclicals condemning the modern errors. And he said, if they don't believe it, then no agreement. It's not possible. Because the superiors form the subjects, and not the subjects form the superiors. So he said, I will raise it to the doctrinal level. And so, these conditions, as you heard, they're very flimsy. Very flimsy. And the General Chapter statement, this is the major compromise of doctrine. You might want to develop the other point.
I'm thinking maybe now is the time maybe we give anyone any questions or any concerns. We may bring those up now because it's been an hour now, so we should do that.
I thought the one that when I first read through it, I didn't catch those nuances that you explained, which are devastating. But the one that shocked me was that Bishop Follet would concede to give up 3 bishops and just have 1 bishop. Is that?
Oh yeah, asking for 1 bishop?
Yeah, so he's gonna.
Well, actually, what that means, again, it's ambiguous language, but in fact, I think what it means is that he's asking for a new bishop to be consecrated, rather than saying we're asking for a single bishop. But he doesn't say clearly we want a new bishop to be consecrated. We want a bishop. And the way it's written, it could mean, they're going to assign Bishop, Bishop Kurtz or Bishop Chaput to be the new traditional bishop. I was just told, but I forget the location. Is it the Chrism Mass or the Christmas? There's going to be one of the local bishops is going to be. Is it in Germany? Where is that happening? Where the bishop is going to be celebrating the Mass with the society? Where's it? The Chrism Mass. You said that's in Germany or? Anyway, so apparently the local bishop is going to do the traditional Mass in our seminary, I guess, so that we're already kind of, quote unquote, mixing it's an ecumenism is what it is, because unfortunately it's not the case, and remember it's very different when a local bishop comes and says Mass in our churches. It's very different than a priest who converts from the Novus Ordo back to tradition. Like for instance, Father Voigt and many other priests, they got expelled from their order. They were thrown out, destroyed. Why? Because they're holding the Catholic faith. And when these priests come back to tradition, it's a battle and it's a firm fight for Catholic tradition. And they're standing on Catholic tradition. But when you have the local Novus Ordo priest who's saying Mass in the in St. Benedict's, the church nearby here, and he comes out of St. Benedict's and he comes down and he just says, okay, on this Sunday I'm going to come in and say a Latin Mass for you guys. and then he goes back to St. Benedict's next week and starts saying the new Mass again, that's a totally different statement. That's a statement that we're on the same page. Statement that we're together. So it's very different. That one bishop doesn't mean that we're going to throw out the other 3 bishops, although he didn't mind that.
Yeah.
But that isn't what that condition means. Yeah.
Okay, so they're just gonna bring a new, asking for a new bishop, but.
If they can get it. If not, it's no big deal. Yeah. So that's what he says. And again, remember, it's one of the non-essential conditions. It's one of the 3 who will be nice to have conditions. There were no, for instance, Archbishop Lefebvre, he was told, you can consecrate Father, what's his name? Father Dom Gerard. And you can consecrate some other liberal priest. And Archbishop Lefebvre said explicitly, they will accept a liberal candidate. If I'm willing to consecrate some liberal, Rome says yes. But my candidates, they say no. He said that back in '88. But yeah.
Yeah, as I'm listening to the conference, I'm thinking about like the past 10 months, and I'd say that a lot of us were mensing and watching. It was like an Agatha Christie, mystery unfolding. And the big question was, are they going to go for a practical agreement? And are they going to go away from the no, come on. Come on.
It's good for you.
Oh, pious the thing. You take it off? Or
Don't worry about it. Just
okay. So as I'm listening, you're talking about sort of the end of all of this. The CNS interview is like a turning point when the mask, as Father Chazal said, is completely off. But they were hiding. It seems to me they were really trying to hide this decision that they made and the intention that they were going to flip and go for a completely practical agreement. And now all of a sudden, at some point, without ever admitting that they've done it, that they've done the flip-flop, now everything they do is geared to teaching the people how we're going to do it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm seeing that there was.
If you're speaking about the how, you've already accepted the principle, and they've jumped past the principle and jumping immediately into the how. That's what you're saying.
I have a
Yeah.
question. Regarding what she said, all this had to be, the priests had to be trained, the priests had to buy into this, and the seminary students had to buy into this before this would come around to us. How did it happen? When did it happen? I didn't see it happen.
I think everybody is informed at the same time, but the way it happened was a slow changing. That's what one of the priests is documented. A slow change over the last 10 years or 12 years especially of how we approach the battle.
I mean, it had to happen with the priests first.
But the way it happened with the priests is by the change in the seminary training, and also by the change of superiors, the practical shifting of anybody who might be difficult. They're all removed from their superior position. You'll notice,
what, 5 years ago?
in the last 10 years, you'll see that in the houses of the society, in most houses, a priest who's certainly less than 10 years ordained, and usually less than 5 years ordained, is a superior. You've got new priests. Now the older priests, they're still around, but they're no longer superiors. So the vast majority of them, there are exceptions, but the majority of the priests in charge are a new generation of priests. And the older ones that are in charge tend to be the ones who are that have the new line anyway. It's not universal. Father de Cacré, who is the superior of France, he's completely against what's modernism, and he's the superior, of course, of our largest district. So there's a few exceptions, but the vast majority of the superiors have been reassigned. There's been a movement of the priests, and then there's a whole general new direction, especially since 2007, which has been throughout the whole society. Summum Pontificum is a good thing. Te Deum Laudamus. 2009, the lifting of the excommunications, and the Rosary Crusades. The Rosary Crusades were essential in the psychological changing of priests and faithful alike. The Rosary Crusades are absolutely essential because we reject modernism of Rome. But we know Our Lady is going to bring the victory. So what you do is you hire Our Lady to tell us the victory is already underway, which is a deception. So Our Lady created the miracle of the lifting of the excommunications and bringing back justice to Archbishop Lefebvre, whose excommunication was not lifted. And so that it's really a mockery, but it's essential. I've talked to also priests who say, no, I mean the Rosary Crusades were good. We see a sign, we see changes. It is through the Rosary Crusades that the traditional Catholic faithful believe there's a change in Rome. It's something very similar, but yes.
Can you go over that fifth condition one more time? Because I'm hearing that it's like, this insinuates that all the properties and stuff are going to be handed over to the diocese.
Exemption of houses.
Is that?
Okay, the exemption of the houses is not about ownership of the property, it's about the legal position.
So that would mean they could just cut railroad in and...
What they could do is not necessarily take over the ownership, but they could close the church so that we would still own it, but we'd have to leave the diocese. So that, because if we would see, it's we'd still have the ownership, for instance, of St. Mary's, Kansas. Or to take a smaller place, something more likely, say, I don't know, in Oregon, or even in Phoenix, Arizona. And the Bishop of Phoenix, I'm sorry, I don't want you in the Phoenix diocese. I think what will most likely happen is they'll say, I'm sorry, but we don't want you in the Phoenix diocese. But then the Bishop of Tucson, which is just south, 100 miles south, so by Western standards, it's like going to McDonald's here. Right? So that's like 5 minutes down the road. And so they say that, it's 100 miles down the road, though. We'll accept you in Tucson. And so the superiors will say, well, the Bishop of Phoenix doesn't want us there anymore. Bishop Olmsted says no more. Because we've already got the Fraternity of St. Peter in Phoenix, so we don't need SSPX in Phoenix, where they've been for the last 35 years. And so, therefore, you must move to Tucson. But look at the good that's going to happen. Because Tucson doesn't have a stable mass. And so those people that have been going to our masses for the last 40 years in Phoenix, well, they can go to the Fraternity of St. Peter Mass. And the priests are going to have to shut down the retreat house, and they're going to have to move to Tucson. So yes, it's terrible that we had to close Phoenix. But look at the bright side. We get to move to Tucson. And that is what they're going to do. That's why they make all the cowboy movies in Tucson. So that's, if you've seen a lot of cowboy movies, you've seen Tucson many times. Yes.
On Christmas Day Mass, after Mass, Bishop Flay, we haven't done serious talking, and we brought up that point, and so this is paraphrasing, but very exactly what he's saying. Questioning about, we've been there for less than 3 years, that means they can shut us down, and he says, no. He says, if we're meeting in a motel room, or we're meeting in somebody's house, or in a barn or something, and it's been for less than 3 years, we can continue to meet in the barn, but we just can't make a chapel. So we can, if we're meeting underground, so to speak, that's okay, because it's not recognized. But if we have a building, and it's been less than 3 years, well, then that's a different story. So as long as we've been meeting, like in this kind of...
In other words, we can lose the building, but we can't lose the hotel.
Well, we can turn around and keep meeting in this room because it's quote, not a church. And I thought that was just a cop-out.
Yes. But go ahead, yes.
Another question. I've had a couple of deep conversations with the priests that are on the other side. And the two sound bites that they've bought is the metaphysical error, which is that they can go into this new church and they can, from within, change it from within. So that's an absolute error because, as we know, the superiors. So my question is, what's going on in the seminary over the past 10 years? What's been happening with St. Thomas? How do they teach metaphysics now? Because that's a pretty basic principle. And it's a principle upon which the SSPX is foundational.
That principle of being underneath, that's not metaphysical, but that's practical. That's, the metaphysical principle is dealing with just the nature of things.
Well, it's an agency principle.
Yeah,
that's why I'm saying it's metaphysical.
Yeah, but I mean, in the last 10 years, the change of attitude is well expressed in the new video. I tried to find it yesterday. The SSPX seminary video, I couldn't find it. There's this new video, it's about 10 minutes long on the seminary, the formation of the seminary. It was on sspx.org for a while. Did any of you see that?
The one about how they say there's not enough space.
Right, yes.
It's all for the seminary and to have lots of room.
Yes, yes. Well, no, it mentions that, but it's more about formation of priests. And Father LaRue says a priest is for the formation of the whole man.
Yeah.
And there is not anything clearly mentioned about the Catholic faith. Not anything mentioned about the errors of the council. There's no negative things in there. It's about the priest, the formation of the whole man, and that's it. There's a new message in the seminary. The message is not an anti-Catholic message directly. It's a message of the priest is a man of dignity. We were in the seminary before there was dignity. We would never have gotten ordained. But nonetheless, you know, but the thing is, a priest is a man of dignity. And a priest he's a noblesse. He's part of the nobility. And therefore he must carry himself with a certain noble being. You'll notice that in the new young priests coming out, you know, they're I don't know, I can't do it. They're walking very proper. They're make sure everything is neat and polished and clean. And you know, like one example, this is an altar boy cassock. This is made in India. This is just as bad. Nonetheless, we would wear altar boy cassocks. Now I think it's a mortal sin for a seminarian to wear an altar boy cassock. That's what we always wore. You used to get a roomy toomey. We call them roomy toomies. And so we would, and so the you have the tailored cassocks like that one there. And then you have the altar boy cassock. We have both, but I mean, we would wear those frequently, and many seminarians, that's all they wore. And some of the priests still do, the older priests, but you won't see that it's less and less, that kind of thing. That's never happening, but I'm saying the whole mentality has changed to a priest is a man of dignity, a priest is a man of nobility. He elevates the people around him by the good example. The priest is a spiritual man. He says prime, sexton, compline every day on time. He takes his medication. He sleeps 8 hours. He is a very proper man. I remember one time Father Couture was telling me that. And I said, okay, well, let me sing you a martyrology, because we always have the martyrology in the morning. He says, okay, let me sing a martyrology for you then. This is it. And he always took his medication, and he went to bed on time, and he never heard the questions outside of the proper time. And after taking his medication and saying his prayers on time, he fell asleep in the Lord. That is not in the life of a single saint. What it says in the breviary so many times, even when St. Alphonsus died at the age of 93, and some saints died at the age of 100, it says every time, he did not die of old age. Worn out rather by, it says it like this, worn out rather by labors than by years, he fell asleep in the Lord.
Yeah.
The breviary can't stand old age. Even though he was 96, he could have lived to be 125. Father Volta's a good example. He died when he was 74. His family is all lives to be 160 or something. But the fact is that Father Voldick, saying 3 masses every Sunday, driving 50,000 miles, when he was dying and unable to breathe because of his cancer, lung cancer, he was still driving and saying Mass. On the day that he died, he said 3 masses. Then he died. So you see that that is the mentality of the old worker. Now we have a young priest who have a different mentality. One of the priests stood up in the pulpit a few weeks ago, one of our parishes in the United States, and he said, I can't do what the other priests used to do. You can't expect this of me. Normally don't say that. Just keep it a secret. but because it's a new, because he believes he has an obligation to make sure he gets his 8 hours of sleep. He has an obligation to make sure he doesn't overwork himself. He has an obligation to make sure he's balanced and make sure he doesn't hear confessions outside of the proper time. And if he does do confessions outside of the proper time, he might be guilty of sin. It's a totally new mentality.
So how do you explain to people who think they can stay the way they are, keep going the same way they're going, and that they're not accepting the errors? It seems to me a lot of people don't understand what they're when you march beside them, you're marching in the same way to the same battle. You're going to have to follow their drumbeat eventually. You can't fight with them and against them at the same time. There's
Well, that was the point you was making last night, right? That how would you fight for and against? I mean, I don't know what do you see with that.
and you see that already, right? Because they are telling people to tone it down, and if you're telling people to tone it down, then you're not fighting the same. You're changing direction, changing slowly. So people
Well,
don't see
I think one of the best
you're going
explanations
one
is
way.
Father's was we had a kind of argument about this discussion last week in the priest at the end of the priest retreat, Father just mentioned his little syllogism. I thought we were going to put it on the board today. Remember your syllogism? The danger of the faith. How do you do it? This compromises the danger of the faith. The danger of faith means it must be resisted. Therefore,
Oh, yeah.
could you just write down
That's
your
St. Thomas
syllogism?
Aquinas.
Because it's very clear. His syllogism is a good, simple way and a clear way of explaining it. And
Because
If
people
the
really,
faith is attacked, you have a duty to rebuke your superiors and stand up and defend it. That's Bishop de Castro Mayor. That was his sermon basically at the consecration. And then if the faith is attacked,
Well, faith is in
put in
danger.
danger, you can rebuke your superiors.
Because you said faith is in danger. I think it's better that way. Faith is in danger, like you said originally.
So when the faith is in danger, pardon my hieroglyphics, you may rebuke your superiors, like St. Paul rebuked St. Peter. The faith is in danger with this general chapter statement compromise and the 6 conditions and the whole new spirit of Vatican II is not so bad, religious liberty is limited, the errors that we thought were from the council are not really from the council but a general interpretation of the council. Have you heard that one?
Oh, yeah.
It's very serious
50
language.
years.
It's ambiguous language. Therefore, you must defend the faith, speak out against the destruction of the faith. And the threat
So
to
I
the
think
faith.
that's really, we were discussing that last night actually. That's really the simple answer. That just like, if the faith is in danger, we must rebuke and defend. Defend that faith and rebuke those that endanger it. And rebuke the endangerment, the doctrine. This new July 14th declaration of the SSPX endangers the faith. Therefore, everyone, objectively speaking, has an obligation to defend the faith openly and rebuke that error. Which means the answer is you can't do both.
right, it's just for people who believe that Bishop Fillet is not changing. They see him as being traditional, and they think that maybe the Pope, they have this idea that somehow the Pope is really becoming more traditional. How do you convince them you can look at the past experiences and say, look at what's happened to all the others, which is very good. But how do you convince them that they're so certain, we'll stay the way we are. We believe they're guiding us the right
Well,
way.
that's a challenge.
You have to somehow succinctly show that they're accepting bad principles. They're going the wrong way.
What has to be shown is this. The faith is endangered by the new SSPX compromise. That's what we have to prove.
Right.
The faith is in danger. Doesn't mean they're directly speaking heresy. It means they're endangering the faith. Now, what endangers the faith? Ambiguous language. Endangers the faith. It's the most serious thing. In fact, it's worse than heresy. Because heresy, in fact, when Bishop Williamson gave us that little talk he gave you last night, explained well how the Protestant is bad. But at least he's clearly bad. You see, the Catholic says 2 + 2 is 4. The Protestant says 2 + 2 is 5. So if you come to him and say it's 6, he'll burn you at the stake. If you tell him it's 4.9, he'll kill you. Because he believes it's 5. Now, it's disastrous, and it's wrong, and it destroys all mathematics. But it's clear, and it's precise. Protestants really believe in Jesus, and they believe Buddha is straight from hell. And they believe the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. Right? So it's wrong, but it's clear. And then he said the next stage was the Protestants and Catholics are fighting each other. Then comes the liberals. If you guys are fighting each other, at least you still believe that Jesus is God. So how about let's just agree to disagree. Protestants can still be Protestants, and Catholics can still be Catholics, and you can have your own ideas, but just don't fight anymore. Next stage, liberalism. Third stage, well, if Catholics believe one thing, and Protestants believe another, they both can't be true. And if they're not going to fight over it, it must not be important. So, religion doesn't matter. We've got to find truth somewhere else. Where is it? It's in science. And so, therefore, the next stage is, there is no truth. Modernism. And if there is truth, it's always changing. This is what's happening in the SSPX. We passed the Protestant stage. We're bypassing that one, which is to believe directly in error. We're going straight to the liberal stage, which is this does not fight. And that's where we are right now. It's liberalism. Let's not fight. And we have to fight. It's the essence of Catholic life.
Okay, this is like just to project out for our fireside chat later. I'm thinking like time allocation problem. As priests, you have to convince a whole multitude of people on all the points that you're making here in this entire conference, that there's something radically wrong inside the SSPX and more generally inside tradition. That's one thing that has to be done. But then you got a group of people like us. We don't need to be convinced. We need to build. So I want to hear more about what we're going to do, how we're going to build, because we're another part of your allocation of time, and we don't want to go stale. You know, we want to actually ride the big kahuna that we got. We got a little kahuna. We don't have a big kahuna. You're trying to make it big. But still, you got something to work with now, and I want to hear more about, okay, what are we going to do?
I don't want to hear about what we're working with because it's pretty pathetic. Nonetheless, you know, it's just like Father Giselle said in the past. It says, you know, all of tradition and SSPX is the cream of the nutty, crazy people, right, in the world. Now, we got the creme de la creme. Okay, so we got the nuts that are rejected by the nuts. And so it's a little bit difficult to work with. And so we are dealing with that. But the fact is that in our building, we have to bring back an apostolic spirit, number one. So I mentioned about charity in the beginning. Because right now, we're discovering the majority of the people we're dealing with in this fight, even though we're dealing with maybe, we had about 300 and something people in Asia, we got maybe something like that here that we've already dealt with, and in England and so on. The majority are pretty much focused on themselves. We've got to stop that. The majority of our people who hold the truth are focused on themselves. That includes priests. And that is, I want to stand firm against the truth. I want to stand firm against the errors. But as long as my priest or my place is comfortable, no problem. If it's not, I got to think about it. I got to weigh it. And that's why I mentioned that in the first talk, in the first brief talk, that this we have to rip that out. It's either the truth or it's not. It's either necessary or it's not. And if you have no Mass, well then you have no Mass. First it's got to be necessary to hold the truth. It's got to be necessary to condemn the errors. It's got to be necessary to take whatever consequences come from that. Then we can build. But if we're always charging forward, and it's like, in fact, my dad was saying what's going to happen. He said a couple months ago, he says, you're going to say charge, charge, and then turn around. Where are they? Right. So, I mean, and but the thing is, we have to have the mentality. We're charging. If you want to come along, fine. If you don't, stay home. We're charging. So we have a war going on, and it's a global war. And we have to have the heart to want to spread the faith everywhere. That's the first condition. In order to build a castle with human beings, it doesn't require buildings, it requires people. And people that are willing to take real steps to help out in our little battle, and who are willing to face the consequences of being refused Holy Communion, being thrown out, being condemned. You know, if you go to battle, in fact, I had this conversation with Bishop Williamson back at the end of May, when we released the sermons on May 27th, when we released the famous day of Father Chazelle and I. We were both in the Philippines, but we weren't in contact with each other. He was in Korea, saying Mass, and I was in the South Philippines. And because of the announcement, for me it was the announcement that we're going to have a deal on May 27th, which was made by Father, I think it was Father Schmidberger. At the end of May there's going to be something in Rome. He made that announcement, and it was now getting to that time. It was Pentecost Sunday. And so I said, okay, it's time to just release this teaching is serious, but it's got to be released publicly to the world. I didn't know what the consequences were going to be. I didn't know it was going to be expelled, but I knew it was a possibility. I called up, Bishop Williamson and said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. He says, what do you think is going to happen? He said, oh, don't worry about it. Says, look, the whole society, easily 80% of the priests in society are on your side, and they totally disagree with what's going on, and they're going to stand up, and there's going to be a resistance. I remember this conversation very well because I've gone through it a few times. And so it says there's going to be a resistance, and said don't worry about it, because when you do this releasing, and people will stand behind you, they can't do anything, and so it's going to be fine. And I said, well, maybe it is going to be fine, but it may not be fine. And when you go to battle, you have to be willing to die, or don't go to war. So it might be that many other priests do the same thing. It might be that we all stand together and hold hands and fight. And it might be that that doesn't happen. But I've got to make a decision. Is it necessary? Is it right? And am I willing to accept death? Well, yes, it's true, but don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. Well, it did. And so, but the fact is that when we go into this battle, we've got to make a decision. Are we dealing with a gravely serious objective problem, and not just subjective? It's not about Bishop Fillet. I've always got along well with Bishop Fillet. We've met many times, ever since I was a seminarian, until today. The last time was last year when he came to the Philippines in October. And so, I mean, I have no problem getting along with him. It's nothing personal. We're dealing with a crisis of the faith. And unfortunately, this crisis is in this world. Being in this world, real men are in the crisis. Real men are on the side of the devil. Real men are on the side of God. And at this time, Bishop Fillet is operating on the side of the devil. Intentions may be good. He may go straight to heaven when he dies. But the fact is, he is maneuvering the SSPX and Catholic tradition away from Catholic tradition and in a modernist direction, and he's not stopping. Therefore, we've got to stand up and fight. So, we have to get rid of the mentality. I think the number one thing about building is people. People that are willing to stand up and be martyred. We're not dealing with a physical martyrdom like the old days. We're dealing with a what do you call it, a psychological. I think Father talked about it this morning. Apparently about the martyrdom that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a dry martyrdom. They're spitting on us, cursing us, saying we're nuts and all that, which we are. So it's not that. It's not like it's a revelation. But at the same time, we have to be willing to stand for the truth. And that's the thing. That's what we have to see. Who's willing to stand for the truth. And then God will build them out.
Bishop Williamson said this morning that back in the day, that there was finally a principle, which was a bishop, that people could rally around. And I'm assuming that the same applies now. You still need to have a bishop. Seems like we're down to one. I
Well,
think
no,
he's
in
a
fact, you know,
principle we need for building, no?
well, you know that it's what's necessary is the faith and real souls ready to stand for it. In the past, I mean, God will send a bishop, and He'll send the priest. Well, we have to have faith. I mean, already all of us have had so many experiences in which someone's dying without the sacraments and there's no priest, then you walk by and, well, there it is. He needs the sacraments. He just happened to be walking by that day. We priests experience that. Not intending to give someone the sacraments, it just happened to be, got lost. And then the next thing you know, there's someone that needs the sacraments. And, so whether it's plane delay or whatever it might be, there are many, many times all of us have experienced where we're not doing things that we want to do or according to our plan, and through this, someone gets a sacrament that would not have otherwise gotten it, because God is good in His maneuvering of things. And also, one passage we read, I think it's in the life of in the Mass of the Confessor, meditate on it many times, where I am, my minister also will be. Ubi, whatever, I forget that, ego minister eri, where Christ says, where I am, my minister also will be. It doesn't say it the other way around. Where my minister is, I will be. Because we have many places where the minister is and Christ isn't there. Sometimes a minister, like St. Francis Xavier, who was the minister of God, he went to Palamkutai, India. He visited there because he called him there, and every single person rejected the faith. So he went back to the coast. He went there, but Christ wasn't there. So he returned to the coast, and he converted everybody along the coast. South India, or so many. So where the minister is, Christ is not always there. But where Christ is, the minister will be. We make sure that Christ is here, He'll find a way of getting the minister. So, anything else there? We should go in a few minutes.
Now, here's a very good book if you want to get into the actual facts and letters, and it's very good.
Oh, and by the way, Father Gruner is coming down here on Sunday.
Really?
And he's, he'll be driving down after Mass, and he's coming on Father Gruner's schedule, which means, if you're up at 2 in the morning, you should see him. And so he'll be coming down here tomorrow, Father Gruner, by tomorrow evening in theory. And he's going to be bringing about 50 of these books. They're going to print out about 50 of these. Is this Operation Suicide? He's going to bring about 40 or 50 of them down. Just made copies of like Father has. And it is a very good, it's just very thorough, it's good, just pointing out the various teachings of the past. Because Father Gruner is going to be here tomorrow, and then you'll see him really on Monday, and then we're going to have that midnight Mass and so on. But anybody else, any other, yes?
I think just to kind of counter your previous point, I think there are people like myself and my wife that aren't on the same page as yourself, that are still looking through all the information, need to see these things. And I think each person's circumstances are different. A single person or a person with grown children doesn't have the same circumstances as my wife and I. We recently just moved to a location to be near a school in the Priory, and now looking.
And it's also true, you need to, it's like we look at two ways. Objectively speaking, what we're saying, we can say is true. But there has to be, you have to investigate. You have to see that it's what we're saying is correct, if it's truly correct, and then how serious it is. Many people see there's a problem, but there's several levels of the problem. Maybe the problem is only practical. Maybe the problem is not really of dogma, in which case, if we don't like it, we have to be careful, but we just keep going. And that's very true. That's why it is true that we have to, especially at this early stage of the battle, we have to repeat often these same things. And we do have to argue the points of the truth. And also, one of the suggestions someone made is that one of the things we'd like to try to do is to have each of you be able to repeat some of the essential arguments, so that when you go out, that's one of the things that Mr. McDonald, we were talking about the other day, is that we're forming apostles here. And then these apostles go out and communicate the truth. And so you're going to have kind of an apologetical understanding of the basic arguments. Like I think Father's argument here is very clear and easy to memorize and very simple. And it's the battle. Faith is endangered. And so how is it endangered? Well, we got all the examples, so many examples, and there's many examples, but the CNS interview, the DT every week, they're coming up with new examples every week. One priest said to us, Father Giselle and myself, over in our Asian tour, SSPX priest, he said to us, he says, don't worry, if things are quiet for a little while, just be patient. Bishop Flay's going to do something else dumb. He's going to say something else bad. He's going to say something else crazy. They can't help it because that's the direction they're going in. And we're seeing that in the DT interview. So no, you're right. You do have to study clearly. You do have to see clearly what the right thing to do is. And then, because no one should make a decision lightly. It should be clear that yes, there's a serious problem. It must be addressed. And addressing it, the first thing we say is, there's a serious problem, must be condemned. That's phase one. But what does that mean, practically speaking? Does that mean you can no longer go to Mass? Maybe it means that, maybe it doesn't. But it definitely means you better go and yell at Padre. You've got to go and talk to Padre. Because you might be surprised how many priests, if they just had a little nudge from some of the faithful, there they are isolated in their priories, and they are concerned, but the people don't say, Father, what's going on? This is the problem, that's the problem, there's liberalism, modernism, it's bad, we've got to do something about it. And he goes, you know what, I think you're right. Priests don't live in a vacuum. They need the faithful. So you need to communicate with them. And if only one or two fuddy-duddies do it, they isolate, eliminate. And if that's the case, that's fine. But if each person does it, like Bishop Williamson just gave the example earlier, I want to apply it to our situation. Archbishop Lefebvre said, if there were only 6 priests, a half a dozen bishops who stood up against Vatican II, they could have made a huge dent. Well, we could say the same thing. If there were only 10 priests of the SSPX, especially some of the bigwigs, like Father de Cacré, and Father Morgan, and Father Peter Scott, and these priests, if they had stood up, we're just little peons. If only 10 of us stood up together, not individually like what's happened, but together, then Bishop Fellay would have to go back into his little cave and nurse his wounds, weep a little bit, and they would have to change the document and argue if one of those 40 priests, one only, during the chapter stood up and said, no, I'm not signing this. This is modernist baloney, ambiguous bull. I'm not signing it. All the other priests would have to retreat because he's speaking the truth. And they couldn't expel him from the chapter because then it would be a massive scandal. He would have been able to stop that declaration. One. That one priest or bishop did not stand up during the chapter. Didn't happen. And when we're all waiting for a resistance, you're going to be waiting for 1,000 years. We can't wait for it. We've got to act. There was a time for thinking, time for acting. And one thing Dr. White, maybe play a tape of Dr. White a little bit later on, Dr. White was not able to come. In fact, he wanted to be here, but his health was not the best and so on. And Dr. White, he said to me actually a few months ago, arguments don't work. They'll never listen to them. They only listen to action. That's where we are.
Pocketbook.
Excuse me?
Action in the pocketbook.
Yeah, in the pocket.
Well, that's one of them. You know what? They got 80 million euros from the Rothschilds, so they don't need your pocketbook.
That's right.
Bishop Fellay said that but they didn't get it. So did they or didn't they get the money?
According to the Maximilian Craw, I think they did get it.
Well, Cross said that they were closing that corporation down. The corporation where he's got the sole authority on,
Yes.
that and he specifically asked, he says, they're shutting it down because they didn't get the money, and that
was a
corporation
different
was
one.
only established
The Ayhoff-
to receive the
The
money.
Ayhoff chapel where they have the picture of the lawyer and the Goodman family.
Yeah, that.
That's the bequest that's going to fund the seminary in Virginia.
Yeah.
It's at 80 million, right?
something like that.
Yes.
That's what we know about it.
Right.
Who knows?
But he
how
admitted
much.
that in his interview just a few months ago, right? Was it after the
October.
October or something? You read that interview, right? I haven't read that.
He basically admitted he's a Zionist, Max Crum, if you know anything about Zionism.
And they, I noticed they had an article in The Economist magazine, which is
Yes.
about Catholic tradition, quote, tradition. How it's becoming they're talking about the Indole, of course.
It was in The Economist.
But The Economist is owned by that family.
The Economist is the Bible of economic communication.
Right.
That's the main organ of truth, I think, for economy. But yes.
I was going to say, I thought of you when you said your comment that a lot of people from my chapel, they don't know anything about Archbishop 7. In 2010, we had an ignatian treat from a priest that had left the society then, and he told me all this stuff was coming, and it's so scary now, but he said, read Against the Heresies, They Haven't Crowned Them, and the biography, or you're going to be swallowed up by it. And those things helped me because once these things started happening in May and so forth, it sent up all the red flags. And I don't know if anybody can read 3 books, those are the books to read. And the biography is huge, but Bishop Tizidi Mallory did an excellent job.
I've read the biography.
Okay, yeah, it was.
You just got to read Franco, yes.
Yes. One other thing, there's been so little talk, Bishop Williamson admitted about the GREC booklet, 57, 59 pages.
Yes.
So why is there so little talk about that? Because it's just, I mean, it seems like that should, if
You should ask
everybody-
Bishop Williamson to give a more thorough explanation of it maybe tonight, or some talk tonight, because we actually discussed that a little bit during the priest retreat, and he did give more of a history of it, which was interesting, how it started in Paris, and a certain group there of getting people together, priests that were involved.
But that's to say, you said that, but what I'm getting at is in terms of amongst the faithful, the anti-SPS faithful, there isn't much talk, and even on the different forums.
Well, see, for me, the conspiratory aspect of it, which we must deal with, because there are bad guys trying to infiltrate the society and trying to kill Catholic tradition, is completely secondary. For me, it's completely secondary. For me, the battle is doctrinal, and we have an official proclamation of the SSPX, and we have regular sermons and regular talks of the SSPX, which are clearly in another direction. Doesn't mean there's no more against Vatican II, because they still say Vatican II isn't good. I know Fraternity of St. Peter priests that say that. And they're adamant about it. They don't like it. But they don't like it personally. But objectively, they have to accept it. And that's the problem we have now. With this new direction, we can still personally dislike, like Father Giselle points it out quite well, in a liberal democracy, you are allowed to disagree with the others. You're allowed to hate them. You're allowed to condemn them as your own personal opinion. And then they can condemn you as their own personal opinion. That's the essence of the liberal democracy. Whereas we argue the other way around, which is it's objective truth and everybody has to accept it, whether they like it or they don't like it. So saying the same, if you say the truth, but it's your subjective opinion, you're no longer saying the truth. You've just killed it. And so that's the difference. Now we're saying the truth as if it's a subjective opinion. Before we were saying the truth because without it no one can be saved. 2 totally different ways of communicating the truth. Yes.
Make one more. When you're talking about the former groups, or the groups that have made practical agreements with Rome, one of the points that comes out is these groups all made these agreements prior to there being any preconditions and prior to any doctrinal talks. And that's the difference between
But that's true.
Some of them had conditions.
Some of them did, but that's a good point though. I think
that point has been made, that none of these groups had these preconditions or these...
which means we're in a worse state than they were. That means we're in a worse state because they were not, in theory, we were told anyway, that Father Refon, Bishop Refon, didn't have to make any signed documents and didn't have to make any conditions. It turns out we learned after the fact that that was not true. But at the time we were told, they made no conditions. Father Laguerre, no conditions. They were completely free. And they still went down. In our case, we're already tying our hands, putting the handcuffs on. Remember Otis in the was it Andy Griffith show?
Yeah, Otis.
When Otis was drunk, what did he do? He went in, took the key off, and opened the jail. Went in, locked himself in the jail, and hung the key on the wall. That's what we're doing. That's the cop's job. Let them do it. And so that now we're walking into the jail ourselves, accepting the conditions before they got a chance. We were going to lock you up. Oh, they're already locked up.
The freeing of the mass and lifting of the excommunications, those weren't in place when these previous groups made their...
No, they were.
Yes, they were.
They were. They asked for those conditions. And on those, it was agreed that they make that agreement.
Don't forget that the quote-unquote freeing of the mass is a lie. So we don't communicate lies. The truth is, in 1984, an indult was granted by Pope John Paul II. That indult still remains. It was expanded out of the great generosity of the Pope in 1988, and it was expanded and made even worse by Benedict XVI in 2007. But in all three cases, including Summorum Pontificum, it is clear in the document that the reason why we have Latin Mass today is because of the permission of the Pope. Not because it was never abrogated. We pull out those two words, never abrogated, never abrogated. But read the sentence. I am giving you permission to have an extended Latin Mass, no longer required to ask the local church for permission. That's a papal permission now. Before it was episcopal permission. Before that it was more restricted. It's the same exact indult, but we now say free the Latin Mass. It's not free. Still depends on the permission of the bishop. In a diocese in which the bishop does not allow it, it doesn't happen. And there are still dioceses in India. The Coimbatore diocese in South India, the bishop said, if the Pope wants a Latin Mass in my diocese, he can come and say it. But it's never going to happen as long as I'm the bishop. And he's not the only bishop. Not Coimbatore, it should be. The next diocese down, he was doesn't matter, you know the diocese anyway. Tamil Nadu, South India, where we used to be. Yeah. So,
To answer that question, in this book you will find he lists the conditions that they had. Campos, Good Shepherd Institute, and La Beroux. They all asked for the Latin Mass, right to criticize modernism.
yeah.
Where's Father Fox now?
Well, Fox, I mean, he's still, what do you call it? He's in his parish in Canada, and you know, he's you know, what do you call it? I mean, there's got a, you know, I think he's still standing. I think he's standing. Like many priests within the society now, they want to do the right thing, and they want to stand for the truth. But you know, I think he's close to making a decision. But at the same time, even though there's 2 points. There's the objective truth. Every priest should stand up, and that's true. They should. However, they have to know that. They have to be sure of that themselves, or else it wouldn't be right to stand up. See, if the priest is just mad at Bishop Fillet, oh, I can get even now. Okay, you're a modernist. What else am I supposed to say? Oh, yeah, so and then so even if he just repeats what happens to be true, he's doing evil. Because bonum indica causa malum ex cum defectum. To be good, you have to be all good in every detail. But to be bad, only one defect. It's one of the disadvantages of being good. So there has to be the whole thing. So when a priest stands for the truth, he must understand that he's standing for the truth clearly. He doesn't want to compromise. He has to understand these things clearly. So each priest has to go through their own study and their own understanding. Because this fog is not just fog for the faithful, it's fog for the priests also. You're not the only ones in the dark. The priests have no idea what's going on. So, but to close in just a minute here, but anything else? Yes?
Well, I just had a question because I remember your sermon and we thought this too when it happened. when they lifted the excommunications and they did for Archbishop Lefebvre and Castor Mayor, so I asked our priest that now, and he said you don't do that for dead people according to canon law. Is that true, or?
No, that's not true.
Okay, because he was just trying to tell us of the goodwill of the Pope, and I said, well, if he had goodwill, he would do that.
You know the case of Pope Formosa?
Yeah.
You know, right? I mean, he was back in 800 or something, and he was dead for what, at least a couple of years. And the other Pope, whatever his name was, he hated him. They dug him up out of his grave, put his tiara on, put his vestments on, excommunicated him, and threw him in the Tiber.
Oh my
So, you know, it can be done. So, you know, and then the next Pope came and unexcommunicated him and pulled him out of the Tiber and put him back in his grave. So it goes both ways. So, I mean, you know,
They
so,
didn't
you
have
know.
the internet back then, though.
Yeah, yeah, but they had GPS. They had to find the body. So, yeah. So no, it can be done. But anyone else there?
I'd like to comment on. Of course, this is not to you, the resistance priest, but it would be good to the ones that are standing on the edge as far as seeing things clearly. And I mentioned that to my local priest. He couldn't really answer me, which is, we all know the SSPX runs on supply jurisdiction. For one, and that's due to the state of necessity that we are in for the last few decades. The way I see things now, the SSPX wants to have both ways. Because if you can have a practical agreement with Rome, with the local bishop, that means the state of necessity is no longer there. So you should stop giving confessions, having marriage, and all that. But at the same time that you say, oh no, we can have a practical agreement, but also we keep going, hearing confession and doing all the things. So at least momentarily what they do is, yes, we have supply jurisdiction, but we also don't have the state of necessity any longer, which is the same thing that when you guys mentioned the...
Okay, what Father Rothstein argues, that question was asked in the Post Falls, and what he argues is that Father Rothstein said that the state of necessity is separate from jurisdiction. So that what he says is that the state of necessity means there's a crisis of faith in the church. So therefore we've got supply jurisdiction. Now if they give us jurisdiction, then okay, we accept it. And if they don't, we still have supply jurisdiction. That's how he connects the best of both worlds. So that you say that the state of necessity is independent from the question of our jurisdiction. Church is in the state of necessity. And if they decide to just graciously throw jurisdiction upon us one day, then we just accept it. See, one of their arguments is, we're not asking for it, even though we're going to Rome every week. Right? And even though we're signing documents, even though we're having discussions, that doesn't mean we're asking for it.
It's just like when you mention a new notice of the bishop coming to our conditional...
Right. Yeah, the noble bishop doing the conditional confirmation for the guy that confirmed last month would be interesting.
It's highly hypocritical.
Yes. No, but that's their way of getting around it. It doesn't fully work, but that's Father Rothstein's answer that he gave in Post Falls about a month ago or so. That the state of necessity is separate from it. And again, he jumps back to the argument that we're just walking along and one day they throw jurisdiction on us. Now, if we're continuing to fight modernism, continuing to fight liberalism and smashing Vatican II, and one day the bishop says, okay, you're approved. All right, I keep smashing them. But that is not what is happening. And so they're telling it's a double-tongued approach. So we're making a deal with Rome, we're trying to find a document that we can both agree to, and which means we have two different opinions about truth. And then at the same time we're saying, well, we're not asking for anything, they're just giving it to us.
Doesn't the whole idea of laying down these conditions sort of un-Catholic? Because if the Pope asks you to do something, you don't bargain with it. You
That's
just
correct.
do it, unless if it's un-Catholic.
That's correct.
So I guess right off the principle of laying down these conditions.
That's the
if
good-
you do this, I'll do that. You know, it's
Right,
walking
that's a
the
good
ball.
point of Father Roberts. He says, you know, you have two possible reactions to authority. I obey or I disobey. I obey because he's legitimate, given a legitimate command. I disobey because he's illegitimate or given an illegitimate command. You cannot have a third option, which is I will obey if you meet these conditions. That is a violation of obedience. So if the Pope is Catholic, you just obey. I mean, Catholic in its obviously Catholic, but Catholic in what he's doing, Catholic in his faith. If he is not, you just disobey. That's it. No in between. We're looking for an in between. That doesn't work. Doesn't work. We better close here because at 12:30 is going to be the lunch, and then we'll try to start at 1:30 or so, or afterwards in the afternoon for the afternoon program, and then. So in any case, we'll just say a quick prayer here, and then we'll go ahead one more. Go ahead. Yes.
What's the next conference?
Okay, at 1:30 we're going to have the little music workshop thing going on, and then at 5:30 is the rosary, and then after the rosary will be the conference. Okay, with Bishop Williams.
Music workshop here.
It'll be we're going to do it up there, and the rosary will also be up there.
So 1:30 is lunch.